In the small town of Willow Creek, Wisconsin, where Friday night football games and county fairs defined community life, Sarah Jensen was a familiar yet overlooked figure. At 35, she was a wiry woman with sun-freckled skin and dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. Her wardrobe consisted of faded jeans, thrift store sweaters, and scuffed boots, clothes that spoke of a life spent pinching pennies. Sarah worked as a part-time librarian and occasional diner waitress, her days a blur of shelving books and serving coffee to truckers at Millie's Diner. To the townsfolk, she was just Sarah, the quiet woman who kept to herself, her life as plain as her attire. She walked into the room like any other woman. The guests at the Willow Creek High School reunion would later recall their voices tinged with regret. On that crisp September evening, the gymnasium was transformed into a glittering venue for the class of 2005's 20th reunion. Streamers in the school's blue and gold hung from the rafters, and a local band played covers of early 2000s hits. The crowd was a mix of locals who'd never left, and those who'd returned from big cities, their designer outfits and polished smiles a stark contrast to Sarah's worn cardigan and second-hand dress. Sarah hadn't planned to attend. Reunions weren't her scene. She'd been a shy kid in high school, more at home in the library than at pep rallies. But her old friend, Emily Carter, now a realtor with a penchant for nostalgia, had insisted. "Come on, Sarah. It'll be fun." "You can't hide forever," Emily had said, her enthusiasm infectious. So Sarah dusted off a floral dress from Goodwill, slipped on her only pair of flats, and walked into the gym, her heart pounding. The room buzzed with chatter, but as Sarah stepped inside, a hush rippled through a nearby group. Jessica Harper, once the homecoming queen and now a corporate lawyer from Chicago, smirked at Sarah's outfit. "Wow, Sarah, did you raid your grandma's closet?" she said, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter followed, sharp and cutting. Mark Reynolds, a local car dealership owner, chimed in. "I guess some things never change. Still the wallflower, huh?" Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she offered a small smile and moved toward the punch table, her head high. She was used to being underestimated. Her childhood in Willow Creek had been marked by loss and struggle. Her parents, dairy farmers, died in a car accident when she was 12, leaving her to be raised by her aunt, a seamstress who barely made ends meet. Sarah had worked since she was 15, bagging groceries and cleaning houses to help pay the bills, yet she never let bitterness take root. She found solace in books, writing poetry in a battered notebook, and helping others in quiet ways, tutoring kids at the library, slipping extra food to struggling families at the diner. Her strength wasn't in her clothes or her bank account, it was in her heart, a fire that burned steady and unseen. The reunion was in full swing, with old cliques reforming and stories of high school glory days flowing as freely as the wine. Sarah kept to the edges, chatting with Emily and a few others who didn't care about her outfit. But Jessica and her circle weren't done. During a slideshow of old yearbook photos, Jessica took the microphone, her smile sharp. "Remember Sarah Jensen?" she said, pointing to a grainy photo of a teenage Sarah in oversized glasses and a hand-me-down sweater, always in the library, never at the parties. "Guess she still live in that aesthetic." The crowd laughed, some uncomfortably, others joining in. Sarah stood near the back, her hands clasped tightly. She could have left, could have let the humiliation swallow her, but something kept her rooted. She thought of her aunt's words. People only mock what they don't understand. Show them who you are, not who they think you are. As the laughter died down, Emily nudged Sarah. "You don't have to take this," she whispered. "Please say something." Sarah shook her head. "Not yet," she said softly. She wasn't one for confrontation, but she knew her moment would come. For now, she sipped her punch and watched, her quiet strength a shield against their words. The reunions program included a segment where alumni shared updates on their lives. Jessica boasted about her law firm, Mark bragged about his dealership's record sales, and others flaunted their careers or families, When the organizer, Mr. Thompson, the retired principal, called for volunteers, the room grew quiet. Then Emily, ever the instigator, raised her hand. Sarah Jensen has something to share, she said, ignoring Sarah's wide-eyed look. Reluctantly, Sarah stepped to the microphone, her flats clicking on the polished floor. The crowd shifted, some whispering, others smirking. As she walked into the room like any other woman, they'd later say. But by the end, everyone stood in silence. Sarah cleared her throat, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. I'm not here to talk about big jobs or fancy houses, she began. I'm a librarian and a waitress. I live in a one-bedroom apartment above the hardware store. But there's something you don't know. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. 10 years ago, I started a program at the library. It's called Bright Futures. It helps kids in Willow Creek, kids like I was, who can't afford tutors or college prep. We've sent 32 kids to college, full scholarships. Kids who were told they'd never make it out of this town. The gym was silent, the air heavy with surprise. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. I don't have much, but I have enough to give back. I've been funding Bright Futures myself, with every tip I earn at the diner, every extra shift I take. And I'm not alone. Some of you here, your kids, your nieces, your neighbours, they're in college because of that program. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jessica's smile faltered, and Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah pulled out her notebook, the one she'd carried since high school, and read a poem she'd written about Willow Creek, its struggles, its beauty, its people. Her words were raw, honest, painting a picture of a town that thrived not on wealth but on community. When she finished, the room was still, then erupted in applause. Some stood, others wiped tears from their eyes. After Sarah's speech, the mood shifted. People approached her, some apologizing for their earlier laughter, others asking about bright futures. Emily beamed, whispering, "I told you they'd see you." But the real turning point came when Mr. Thompson took the stage again. I need to add something, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah didn't mention this, but Bright Futures isn't just a program. It's a lifeline. My granddaughter, Lily, is one of those 32 kids. She's at UMadison now, studying to be a doctor. Because of Sarah, crowd gasped, and Jessica's face turned pale. Mark, who'd mocked Sarah's clothes, stood and walked over. I had no idea, he said, his voice low. My nephew, Jake, he's at Notre Dame because of your program. I'm sorry. One by one, others came forward. A teacher shared how Sarah had tutored her son. A single mother spoke of the books Sarah had donated to her daughter. The truth about Sarah's quiet, selfless work unraveled, each story a thread in the tapestry of her impact. Jessica, cornered by her own shame, approached last. I was wrong, she said, barely meeting Sarah's eyes. I didn't know what you've done. I'm sorry. Sarah nodded, her smile gentle. It's okay, she said. I don't do it for Apologiz. I do it for the kids. The reunion was a catalyst. Word of Sarah's work spread, and Willow Creek rallied around Bright Futures. Mark donated a scholarship fund in his nephew's name. Jessica, humbled, offered pro bono legal help to expand the program. The local paper ran a front-page story, calling Sarah Willow Creek's unsung hero. Donations poured in, enough to open a second tutoring centre in a neighbouring town. Sarah remained unchanged, still wearing her thrift store sweaters, still serving coffee at Millie's, but she was no longer invisible. Kids at the library called her a Miss Sarah, their faces lighting up when she helped with homework. Emily organised a community event to honour her, and the gymnasium, once a place of mockery, was filled with gratitude. One evening, as Sarah closed the library, a stranger approached, a man named David Ellis, a professor from UMadison who'd read about Bright Futures. I want to help, he said. Your program could be a model for rural communities everywhere. He offered to connect Sarah with university resources, and over coffee at Millie's, they began planning a statewide initiative. David became a friend, then something more, a quiet presence who saw Sarah for who she was. Their relationship was slow, built on shared values and late-night talks about books and dreams. Sarah didn't need a grand romance. She needed someone who understood her heart. Years later, Bright Futures had grown into a national program with chapters in 20 states. Sarah's poetry was published, her words a beacon for those who felt unseen. She and David worked together, their partnership a blend of love and purpose. At a national conference for Bright Futures, Sarah took the stage, her voice as steady as ever. "I walked into a room like any other woman," she said, echoing the night that changed everything. But by the end, everyone stood in silence, not because of what I wore, but because of what I carried inside. We all have that strength. It's not in our clothes or our wallets. It's in what we do for each other. The crowd stood, silent, then erupted in applause. Sarah Jensen, the simple woman mocked for her clothes, had shown the world a truth worth apologizing for. Strength was in the heart, and hers was unbreakable. Chapter 8. The Echoes of Strength. 2 years after the reunion that changed Willow Creek, Sarah Jensen's life had settled into a new rhythm, though her essence remained unchanged. She still lived in her modest apartment above the hardware store, still wore her thrift, store sweaters, and still poured coffee at Millie's Diner on weekends. But the town saw her differently now. The library, where she spent her days organising books and tutoring kids, had become a beacon of hope. Its new wing, named the Sarah Jensen Community Hub, bustling with after-school programs and adult literacy classes. Bright Futures, her initiative to help underprivileged kids, was no longer just a local effort. It was a national movement, with chapters stretching from rural Wisconsin to urban centers like Atlanta and Seattle. As she walked into the room like any other woman, people still said, recounting that reunion night when Sarah's quiet strength silenced a room of skeptics. But now, those words carried pride, not mockery. The truth about her contributions had humbled Willow Creek, and the apologies she'd received. Jessica's reluctant admission, Mark's heartfelt regret, had sparked a ripple effect. The town was knitting itself back together, not around wealth or status, but around the kind of community Sarah had always believed in. One chilly November morning, as Sarah shelved books in the library, a letter arrived from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. David Ellis, the professor who'd become her partner in both work and life, handed it to her with a knowing smile. "Open it," he urged, his warm brown eyes sparkling with anticipation. Inside was an invitation to speak at a national education conference in Washington, D.C., where Bright Futures would be honoured as a model for community-driven education reform. The letter praised Sarah's visionary leadership and requested her presence to accept an award on behalf of the programme. Sarah's hands trembled as she read it. "Me? At a conference?" she said, half laughing. "I'm just a librarian." David shook his head, his hand resting gently on hers. "You're not just anything, Sarah. You're the woman who made all this happen. They need to hear from you." The idea of speaking to a room full of academics and policymakers intimidated her. Sarah was comfortable in Willow Creek, where she knew every face and every story. But David's encouragement, coupled with the memory of that reunion night when she'd found her voice, pushed her forward. "Okay," she said finally. For the kids, the conference was held in a sleek convention center in D.C. Its halls filled with educators, politicians, and non-profit leaders in tailored suits and polished shoes. Sarah arrived in a simple grey dress she'd sewn herself, her old notebook tucked under her arm for courage. As she stepped into the main auditorium, she felt the familiar sting of eyes on her, some curious, others dismissive. She walked into the room like any other woman, a delegate whispered to her colleague, noting Sarah's unassuming appearance. But Sarah was used to being underestimated, and she carried her strength like a quiet flame. When her turn came to speak, the auditorium was packed. David sat in the front row, his presence a steady anchor. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped to the podium, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not here to talk about policy or budgets," she began, her Wisconsin accent grounding her words. I'm here to talk about people, about kids in towns like mine who get told they're not enough because they don't have money or connections. Bright Futures isn't just a program. It's a promise that every kid deserves a chance to shine. She shared stories of the students she'd helped. Lily, now thriving at UQ-Madison. Jake, studying engineering at Notre Dame. Maria, a shy girl who'd won a poetry contest after Sarah's tutoring. She read a new poem from her notebook, one about the strength found in small places, the diner, the library, the heart. Her words were simple but powerful, weaving a tapestry of hope that left the audience spellbound. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, people stood, their applause thunderous. A woman in the back, a superintendent from Chicago, wiped tears from her eyes. A senator approached Sarah afterward, promising to advocate for federal funding for Bright Futures. The moment echoed that night in Willow Creek, but on a grander scale. Sarah's truth, once mocked, was now undeniable. The conference catapulted Bright Futures into the national spotlight, but with growth came challenges. Back in Willow Creek, Sarah faced pressure to scale the program faster than she'd anticipated. New chapters needed funding, staff and oversight, and Sarah, who preferred working one-on-one with kids, struggled with the administrative demands. Jessica Harper, now a dedicated volunteer, offered to manage the legal side, but tensions arose when corporate sponsors pushed for changes that clashed with Sarah's vision, like prioritizing high-profile donors over community input. One evening, as Sarah and David sorted through grant applications at the library, she confessed her doubts. "What if I'm not the right person for this anymore?" she said, her voice heavy. "I started this to help kids, not to play politics." David leaned back, his calm presence steadying her. "You're still helping kids, Sarah. You're just doing it bigger now. Remember why you started. Because you saw kids like you, who needed someone to believe in them. You're still that person." His words reminded her of the reunion, when she'd stood up to mockery and shown her strength. She decided to refocus Bright Futures on its core mission, rejecting sponsors who didn't align with her values. She hired local leaders for each chapter, ensuring the program stayed rooted in community, not corporate agendas. The decision wasn't easy. It cost some funding, but it preserved the heart of Bright Futures. A year later, Willow Creek hosted a festival to celebrate Bright Futures' 5th anniversary. The town square was alive with music, food stalls, and booths showcasing student art and writing. Sarah walked among the crowd, her notebook now a published anthology, its proceeds funding scholarships. Kids she'd tutored ran up to hug her, their parents sharing stories of how Bright Futures had changed their lives. Jessica, once her harshest critic, organised the event, her transformation complete. "I was wrong about you, Sarah," she said, handing her a bouquet of wildflowers. "Well, you didn't just change the town, you changed me." Mark Reynolds, whose dealership now sponsored annual scholarships, pulled Sarah aside. "You know, I still feel bad about that reunion," he admitted. "But I'm proud to know you." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "We all make mistakes, Mark. What matters is what we do after." That night, as fireworks lit up the Wisconsin sky, Sarah took the stage one last time. "They thought I was nothing because of my clothes," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "But strength isn't what you wear, it's what you do. Together, we've built something that'll outlast us all." The crowd stood, silent at first, then cheering wildly. Sarah Jensen, the woman once mocked, had become a symbol of what was possible when heart triumphed over judgment. Bright Futures grew, but Sarah stayed true to her roots, living simply and teaching kids in Willow Creek. She and David married quietly in the library, surrounded by books and the people they loved. Her poetry continued to inspire, each verse a reminder that strength was in the small, quiet acts that changed the world. At a school assembly years later, a young girl read Sarah's poem aloud, her voice echoing. But by the end, everyone stood in silence. The words, now legendary, captured Sarah's legacy, a simple woman whose truth made everyone see.